Good morning. We're once again here at Perumín in Arequipa, and I'm with Brian Griffin this time, who is principal at Golder Associates, which is a mining consulting company, right?
And not just mining, but mining, oil, gas, many sectors, but mining's our big sector.
And what's your importance, what's Peru's importance for Golder?
Well, one of our largest offices is here in Lima, and we've been in Lima for well over 15 years. We have many, many clients here. And recently we opened up an office in Arequipa as well. So that's new for us, and we have a big practice in Peru.
So that shows that you're pushing forward despite the uneasy world.
Exactly. No, it's
climate.
important, and as I say, with our major clients, we've been involved a long time, and we will continue.
Great. And your main job or service would be to provide impact
assessments.
Impact
yes.
assessments, or
It's we do both engineering, geotechnical engineering, and mainly with tailings, and that's tailings management, that part of the mining business, and environmental impact assessments. We have a very big business there.
Great. You will be doing a conference tomorrow called The Growing Importance of Risk Assessments for Environmental Impact
That's
Assessments,
right?
And could you tell us a bit about what's risk assessment for these environmental impact studies and what's its importance?
Of course. No, risk assessment is one of the tools that is helping our EIA process. And risk assessment is just another approach to help increase our knowledge base and help us manage the environment. Risk, the way we define risk, it's really a measure of two things. One, the severity of consequences from a risk event, and the other is the likelihood of those consequences occurring. In our EIA business, we talk about the environment in a holistic manner. We talk about the physical environment, air, water. We talk about the biological environment, the wildlife, aquatic life, fish, and we talk about the socioeconomic environment. And risk assessment can help in all those areas, looking at the risk to public health and safety, the risk to the environment. And we're dealing with many hazards. We deal with the natural hazards like earthquakes, of course, here in Peru, and severe climate events like floods. We deal with the industrial hazards, like our engineered facilities like dams. If there's failures, we want to be able to assess those. Transportation, of course, is a large industrial risk, and that's part of that assessment. And health risks, we look for the long-term exposure of people to pollutants in the air, perhaps, or water. So we deal with all those hazards with our risk assessment. Really, it's a process, part of managing risk, and that process allows us to prioritize, to rank risks, and really to look at risk mitigation. I mean, that's a key part of what risk assessment will do for the EIAs.
And would you think this risk assessment measure is more important today given the volatility?
Well, it's really an additional tool. What it really does is not just look at impacts, but look at the risks, so we can rank our efforts to manage risk. It's really risk management. And we get a tool that allows us to organize the risks so we can actually manage them better. We can rank them, and we can look at specific risks and how we can manage those in a way that you can look at prevention measures, you can look at protection measures. There's many measures to stop a risk from happening.
Could you give us an example on how you measure? Because I guess it's very complex, right?
Well, it can be complex, but if you take a look at, there was two sides of risk. One is the consequence severity, and the other is the likelihood. And to take a simple example, I don't think I'll rent a car here in Arequipa. My driving is not up to the rest of the standards. For me, that would be a risk. And what do you mean by the risk? Well, the risk exists. It's just driving. And really, what you're talking about let's say, severity of consequences. If you got injured, that's one severity, or you could have a fatality. That's a worse severity. And really what you're doing is looking at the likelihood of that and what we do to mitigate that. We put prevention measures, like we make sure we're attentive when we're driving. We make sure we've got good vehicles because there's so much traffic.
Right.
Watch out for the potholes.
Okay.
And, you know, if you are in an accident, you've got seat belts to protect you after for the consequences so you don't become a more serious consequence.
So it's about prevention but also mitigation.
Both sides, yes. And sometimes it's easier to help with the prevention, and that's normally where we want to be first, but often it can be easier with consequence. So we look at both.
Because it's sometimes impossible to make
absolutely.
preventions. For instance, how would you say for transportation
Yes.
of an oil pipeline or mineral?
There's many things you do to prevent things. Well, in the mining business, our slurry pipelines, and often the concentrate will be a pipeline from the facilities.
Right.
And those pipelines, we look at design, we look at how we operate, we look at procedures to prevent something from happening. But if it does, we don't want the material to go everywhere, so we try to control that.
How would you say risk assessment is being done in Peru? Is it being done?
Yes, very much so. I was talking about risk assessments for EIAs, but of course we have risk assessments for operations, for many of our engineering functions. And many of our large clients will use risk assessment for their whole company. And EIA is one place where it's growing more important. It was more impact before, and now it's impact and risk.
Okay, so for the EAIs, how would you apply risk assessment? So for instance, an example, a mine is about to exploit a certain place.
Yes.
And what risks should it look for?
Really, it's defined by the EIA. There's a scope with the EIA, and it may include just the mining activities, and that includes construction and operations. It may include transportation, if there's reagents coming to the site or product leaving the site, and it includes port facilities too. So the EIA defines the scope, and with the risk assessment, what we're looking for are those material risks, those larger risks that could occur if they're not managed. For example, when we talked about the slurry pipeline, or if we could talk about a concentrate pipeline, the engineering that we do up front, we can look at the historical performance, we can look at how we're going to operate, there's design specifications. Those are the engineering things that you want to do it in such a way that you'll mitigate any concerns when you operate.
So this is a management tool.
It is.
And how can you measure the impact, the benefit it has on companies?
What you're really trying to do is make a measurement, just like with a thermometer you measure the temperature. It's hot here.
Yes.
You can tell because it's 30 degrees right now. Well, the same with risk. And one way to do that is just a two-sided matrix where you have consequence and likelihood. And a consequence, for example, for public safety could be a minor incident, it could be something more major, an injury.
That's a cost for the company.
Of course, and for the people, and for everybody. And that's one level. The other is, does it happen every day? Does it happen maybe once a year? And you can look at, for example, transportation, of how well we've done. And what measures do we put in place to reduce the likelihood of having an accident that's going to hurt people? So that's a matrix. And if we look at a particular EIA, the operations, we can take that scenario, take a look at how much exposure we have for the transportation, we look at how we're managing it, and we can place that scenario in the matrix. And where you can see the value is if that's too high a risk, what we want to do is make sure we place it somewhere else. And that's really how we can use it as a management tool. So we know if we have a communication system with our drivers that doesn't work, well, we can see if we're reducing that risk.
Would you say in regional terms,
Yes.
comparing Peru with Chile, for instance, or other
sure.
big mining countries, how is this risk assessment? Is here the standard higher, lower?
For EIAs, EIAs themselves are evolving all around the world, and here in Peru too. They're changing and they're improving. It's part of an improvement process. And the objectives here in Peru for risk assessment in EIAs are much the same objectives in many countries, but the process itself is not identical everywhere, mainly because it's specific to the environment you're in. It's very specific to the type of project, what kind of a mine it is, if it's underground or above ground. There's many differences that make it the approach to the risk assessment specific to that location. Having said that, we want to share good practices. So a mine in Chile, for example, that's got some good practice, we want to share those good practices here. So yes, in Peru we definitely have risk assessment. It's growing in its importance, and there's more and more.
And what would you say we could improve to our area?
Well, risk assessment actually is one tool to improve our EIAs. What it really does is it gives decision makers more knowledge. It gives more awareness, and it reduces the uncertainty with what you're predicting. So you're trying to help with the uncertainty and at the same time increase our knowledge base. So decision makers, when they're making the decisions about the mine project, about the best way in which to manage the environment, they have a better database to make those decisions.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.